Mark Fletcher back with you once again, finally. It has been a while. I attended this year's Flight Sim Expo in Houston, Texas back in June. While I was there, I had some good discussions with Nicky, the CEO of Honeycomb Aeronautical. I had met him before at the expo in San Diego in 2019, so I had been looking at his products for quite a while. While I was there, I decided to place an order on the Alpha and the Bravo controllers to replace my beloved CH Products Fighter Stick and Pro Throttle. Tough decision because I've had those controllers for over 30 years and they've undergone numerous modifications. So after about 3 months of intensive configuration, I finally have everything set up now, I think. But the Honeycomb controllers are not the only new additions, and that's what prompted me to make this video. As if giving up my CH gear wasn't enough shock, I decided also to retire my Knobster. Okay, so if you watched my video on the Knobster, you're probably experiencing a bit of disbelief. Well, here's how it happened.
November 7 Whiskey Alpha turn, left heading 185 vectors to the ILS approach for runway 36 at Myrtle Beach International descent and maintain 4,000 feet.
So he's got me doing two things here, changing the heading and then descending vertical speed. Since installing the Bravo, I had deleted the Knobster modes for altitude, vertical speed, course, and flight level change because I wanted to start using those modes on the Bravo. But using that selector knob on the Bravo is really just like using the modes in the Knobster. And the biggest problem with mode-based controls is you'll turn that knob thinking you're in one mode when you're actually in another. And in the heat of the moment, you got a real mess. I got lucky here because I was in vertical speed mode thinking I was in the heading. I was trying to change the heading and it wasn't moving, and that's when I realized I was in vertical speed. Now I've gotten pretty used to this, having used the Knobster for several years, but since I had just installed this Bravo, changing the mode with this little selector just was something different. It was at the handoff that things really went south.
November 7 Whiskey Alpha, you are 14 nautical miles south of Myrtle Beach International Airport. Fly heading 330 descent to 1,600 feet, cleared for ILS to runway 36 contact tower on 128.45. Good afternoon.
The controller asked me to do three things all in the same breath. Change heading, drop altitude, and contact the tower. Because I was new to the Bravo, I instinctively started turning the Knobster thinking I was changing altitude when I was actually changing heading, and when I realized that, then I had to think a minute, oh yeah, it's on the Bravo and I got to turn this knob. It was a mess. And when I finally got all that straightened out, the controller started fussing at me because I hadn't contacted him yet. Now facing this machine gun ATC right at the beginning of the intermediate fix is nothing new, but changing out my equipment like this quickly gave me a distaste for modes. So I started thinking, man, it would be great to just have one more Knobster to at least handle altitude changes. I'm laying in bed thinking about this, right? And I remembered buying a little joystick circuit board about 10 years ago from this guy over in England named Leo Bodnar. So I thought, I wonder if old Leo is still in business. Indeed he is. Now what's so great about these boards is they look just like a joystick to the game, and with the software he provides, it's very easy to build something with buttons or switches or knobs. So when I first started thinking about this, I was thinking of making only one knob so I could have like altitude in addition to heading, so I wouldn't have to keep changing modes back and forth between those two. But then I realized if I bought one of Leo's boards, I could have a whole array of these things. So I started looking at all the tasks I had assigned to the Knobster, and I've always been careful not to overdo it. And really the only thing I used the Knobster for was to control the knobs on the G1000. And that's when it occurred to me, heck, I can just make a panel that has all the knobs that the G1000 uses. I had bought a couple of those dual rotary encoders from my buddy from Propwash Simulations, the guy that made the radio stack that I use. And after working out everything that it was going to take to replace the Knobster, this is what I came up with. Controlling the PFD and MFD G1000 units requires 7 dual knobs, that is, knobs that have both an outer and an inner ring. These include the PFD FMS knobs, the MFD FMS knobs, range knobs, course knob, IAS and vertical speed knobs, which are actually on the autopilot panel, the altimeter, and barrel heading. There's also a little joystick on the MFD which allows you to pan around the moving map, and you enable and disable this panning by pressing in on the joystick. When I was using the Knobster, I accomplished this panning using the inner and outer knobs, but it was a bit awkward at best. After drawing up the circuit on a piece of paper, I realized I was going to need a circuit board that accommodated 40 button inputs. Checking Leo's website, I found that his largest board accommodated only 32 button inputs, plus they were just too large for my application. Then I saw the little Micro-BBI board had 20 inputs, plus it's the size of a postage stamp, so I ordered 2 of them, and amazingly they came to me in a little over a week. So I scrounged around in my metal shop and found a piece of aluminum angle of the right size, and after drilling the necessary holes, I was off to the races. Then after a little bit of soldering and some hot glue, the project was complete. Now if you own the Honeycomb Bravo, you'll notice on the top flat part there's 4 or 5 screws, and that area is just begging for something to be screwed onto it. So I did. I knew I didn't want to use a rotary for the panning joystick function. So I scratched around in my boxes of junk and found an 8-way hat which seemed to make a pretty good mini joystick. The only thing missing was the button press function. I glued a small button on the back and rigged a plunger that would push the button when you pressed the hat. That actually worked better than I imagined, so now my panning control was complete. Now having inner and clear buttons for both the PFD and the MFD are obvious additions, and I wanted to have those buttons in a good position so that when I'm turning the knobs I can reach down with my thumb and hit the inner key or use my knuckle and hit the clear key, and that worked out really good. The other knobs were derived straight from the Knobster layout. The range knob uses the outer ring to control the range of the map on the PFD, and the smaller inner knob controls the range of the map on the MFD. This knob, which I've labeled Barrel Course, sets the altimeter with the big knob, and the course deviation indicator if you're using OBS mode or a VOR. Pressing this knob will set standard pressure. I gained flight level change, or IAS, and vertical speed together because that's how I had it set up with the Knobster. I'm using both outer and inner knobs to set altitude. The outer knob sets thousands of feet, while the inner knob sets hundreds. I ganked barrel and heading together even though I'd already had barrel set up on another knob, and I did it this way because that's how I had it set up with the Knobster, and I didn't want to introduce any more change in behavior than necessary. Pressing this knob will center the heading bug. If we look at the Micro-BBI board in game controllers, we'll see the two controllers there called Micro Interface 2 and Micro Interface 1. And this is what you'll see inside the sim. Looking at the properties of one of these, Interface 1 for example, what you'll see is a list of buttons. If I turn the MFD FMS knob, you'll see the corresponding buttons flash as they're being pressed. This shows how digital encoders emulate button presses. So even though I have an array of knobs, everything really is just a button. And that's what's so cool about Rotary encoders. Setting this panel up inside the sim is just as simple as setting up a joystick. It's nothing but a series of button assignments. For example, here in X-Plane, if I bring up the controller interface, and I have BBI Interface 2 selected, device window, and over on the right column you see all the buttons for Interface 2. Now the altitude knob is using the first 4 buttons of the second interface. And as you can see, the only button that's not assigned to anything is button number 1. And just to make sure that we have the right button, if we turn that knob, you'll see that it flashes, so we know that's the right button. The hardest part about this is trying to find the right button to assign. But after a little investigation, we have determined that we're looking for G1000 MFD altitude buttons. So we'll proceed to drill down for those. So we will assign that to G1000 MFD altitude outer ring up. And now just to make sure that we have everything assigned correctly, we'll turn the knobs and make sure that everything has the correct assignment. So just as a final little illustration here, I've set up the panel to work with the GNS 530-430. And I'll enter an airport into the flight planner using the PFD FMS knobs. So even though I built this panel around the G1000, as you can see, you can make it work with just about anything. So my quick tip of the day is to consider building yourself a knob array panel. Want to buy a Knobster? Nah, just kidding. Even though I've retired it, the Knobster's been a great companion. Well, I hope this has been educational and maybe even a little bit entertaining.